Good afternoon. It is exactly 2 weeks since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and there are no signs of an imminent ceasefire or de-escalation. I'm Lin Li Fu. Thanks for joining us on ST Live. Death and destruction continues to rain down on Ukraine, and even women and children are not spared. A Russian airstrike has badly damaged a children's hospital in the already devastated city of Mariupol, burying patients under rubble and injuring women in labor. Footage from Ukraine's foreign ministry of the site showed smoldering rubble and collapsed windows. Calling the attacks beyond atrocity, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the bombing of the children's hospital is the final proof of the genocide of Ukrainians. More than 1,000 civilians have died in Mariupol, and this latest bombing took place despite a Russian pledge to halt firing so that trapped civilians could escape the city, where hundreds of thousands have been sheltering without water or power for over a week. Despite the Kremlin claiming that Russian forces do not fire on civilian targets, the impact of the war on children in Ukraine has been keenly felt. At least 37 children have been killed and 50 injured since the start of the invasion, and according to UNICEF, more than 1 million children have had to flee Ukraine to neighboring countries. The US has hit back at Russian accusations that Ukraine is operating chemical and biological weapon labs with US support. White House press secretary tweeting, "This is all an obvious ploy by Russia to try to justify its further premeditated, unprovoked and unjustified attack on Ukraine." Now that Russia has made these false claims and China has seemingly endorsed this propaganda, we should all be on the lookout for Russia to possibly use chemical or biological weapons in Ukraine or to create a false flag operation using them. Meanwhile, China is sending 5 million yuan or $1 million Singapore dollars worth of humanitarian aid to Ukraine, with the first shipment already on its way. According to Beijing, the boxes are packed with emergency supplies, including food and daily necessities. It comes as Chinese President Xi Jinping told his French and German counterparts that China was pained to see the flames of war reignited in Europe and called for maximum restraint in Ukraine. But at the same time, China has refused to condemn Russia's actions in Ukraine or to call them an invasion. China has been playing a balancing act since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Beijing has avoided the pressure to take sides and refrained from criticizing Moscow. Yet as Russia continues to attack, President Xi Jinping called for maximum restraint, as I said earlier. In Beijing, is Beijing rethinking its quasi-alliance with Russia? Dr. Alexander Korolev from the University of New South Wales in Sydney joins us now. He is senior lecturer in politics and international relations, and his expertise includes international security with special reference to China and Russia. Alex, good to have you with us today. President Xi on Tuesday said China is willing to work actively with the international community to prevent the tense situation from escalating or even running out of control. What do you make of these comments by China?
Well, I wouldn't read too much into these comments. This is China being diplomatic. China's trying to find a diplomatic posture, which on one hand would present China as a good global citizen, but on the other hand, also would not antagonize Russia. So China is involved in some kind of diplomatic dance at the moment because it cannot afford antagonizing Russia. It needs Russia for its long-term confrontation with the United States, which is likely to intensify. But at the same time, of course, given the gravity of the situation, China cannot openly support Russia. That's why we're observing this kind of diplomatic rhetoric with regards to the Ukraine crisis. But when it comes to comments on US-Russia relations, for example, China appears to be supporting Russia at the global level. So we have two levels here. When it comes to the conflict itself, China tries to be very diplomatic, not to take sides as if, but in fact, when it comes to global competition, China appears to be on Russia's side.
In your opinion, do you think China will take defining steps to end Russia's war?
I don't think China is in a position to do that. as I mentioned, China needs Russia because the prevailing trend in the contemporary international system is the intensifying confrontation between China and the United States. China and the West is doing everything basically to poke China in the eye. We had China virus, we had trade war between China and the United States. Now there is AUKUS alliance involving the United States, Australia, and UK, and many other things. So I cannot envision a situation in which China would try to exert pressure on Russia to stop the war. However, there might be some mediation attempt behind the curtain, so to speak. But I don't see China stepping in actively and putting pressure on Russia to stop the war.
And from the Russian perspective, what do you see as Putin's way out of this war?
Well, I think there is no easy way out for Putin because again, given the gravity of the situation, it's a very severe crisis. It's a very severe humanitarian crisis and geopolitical crisis. So any way out will have to take some form of a compromise, specifically between Russia and the United States. And it's also China's view. It's not just Russia and Ukraine. It's a structural problem. It's about geopolitical competition, about great power politics. So I think the most desirable way out is probably some sort of neutrality status for Ukraine with security guarantees involving the European Union, United States, Ukraine, and Russia. And I'm really puzzled by the fact that it has never been offered, and neither Ukraine nor its Western friends tried to broker this neutrality solution for Ukraine, which from the humanitarian standpoint would be the best possible option. And for Russia as well, Russia feels cornered. It cannot just pull out of the conflict. So some sort of a compromise, I think, should move along the lines of possible neutrality for Ukraine. But unfortunately, at the moment, I don't see the willingness either on the Russia side or on the side of the United States and its allies to compromise an inch for the sake of Ukraine. So I think it's a stalemate at the moment. And I'm cautiously hopeful that the neutrality proposition will be made at some point explicitly and supported by the great powers.
Closer to where we are, how do you think Russia views the Asia-Pacific region in terms of its position in this conflict?
Well, definitely, I think Russia views the Asia-Pacific region as an alternative to the West, broadly defined, mostly the European Union and the United States. Russia started its so-called reorientation to Asia or pivot to Asia. A few years ago, it's not a particularly new policy. I think it started in 2012. It accelerated after the first iteration of the Ukraine crisis in 2014. So definitely Russia is trying to pivot to Asia and to reorient its economic links and strategic links towards Asia, specifically China. It has not been so far very successful. The EU is still the largest trade partner of Russia, even though the share of China in Russia's external trade has been growing significantly. But yeah, strategically speaking, Asia-Pacific region is some kind of geopolitical alternative for Russia, because Russia views itself as a Eurasian country rather than a European country. And it's been trying to move in that direction to replace the EU, the relationship with which are not likely to improve anytime soon.
Interesting perspectives there. Thank you very much for your time today. Dr. Alexander Korolev, Senior Lecturer in Politics and International Relations from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. From politics to sports. If you were watching the football last night, you would have seen this. In the Champions League, the Manchester City and Sporting Lisbon squads lining up in front of a screen that says peace. And they were not the only teams showing solidarity with Ukraine. Real Betis players wearing Stop War jerseys in the colors of the Ukrainian national flag ahead of their Europa League game with Eintracht Frankfurt. Not just footballers, Formula One drivers who are in Bahrain right now for the next round of pre-season testing also showing their support for Ukraine in their No War t-shirts. All competitors were present for the display of unity except Lewis Hamilton, whose flight was delayed en route to Bahrain. And our coverage on the Ukraine crisis continues on straitstimes.com and on Facebook as well as YouTube. Don't forget to hit subscribe to stay informed and activate the bell icon on YouTube to catch live news updates. I'm Lin Li Fu. Thanks for watching.